Today, I'm delighted that we're reading today because this is Read Across South Carolina Day. So all over South Carolina, there have been readings last night and all day today to celebrate reading, but also to resist the banning of books. So last night, there were lots of readings in bookstores of books that have been banned. And there was a big reading with high school kids on the grounds of the state capitol today. So I'm glad we're part of that. And the second thing, so my book is called A Pooka in Arkansas. A pooka is an Irish shapeshifter, a trickster. He's not good, he's not bad, he's just a trickster. The thing you should know about him, he is a shapeshifter. He can show up as anything, often a horse, sometimes a dog, a cow, an ass, an eagle, an old man with goat's ears, anything. He sometimes does your chores for you unless you ask him to, and then he will promptly disappear. He likes to tell stories. He pisses on all the blackberries at the end of the summer because at the end of the summer, they're his, so they're not yours anymore. So those are just a few things to know about the pooka. I'm going to start with a poem called When I Was a Young Animal, which is the poem that opens the book. When I was a young animal, I learned by watching others, my father and the other men, my mother closing the door. The field smelled like a field. I didn't know that then. I could smell my young uncle on his hand-me-down shirts and pants, the buckskin coat with fringed sleeves, smell my grandmother's home when I tugged them on. On the farm, we were a pack, the other cubs and me, roaming the dirt roads and fields, slinging clods at cars and one another, pissing on anything, into the fire they built behind the shop to burn the trash, the small cans exploding in the flames. We were sunburnt, sugar bit. Our mothers checked our skin for ringworm and ticks. I was a young animal. I learned by watching others. And not only is there pooka folklore, but I have a lot of retold or made up fairy tales throughout the book. So this is one of the fairy tales. Fairy tale. The blue mother lives on the moon. She is a mortar and pestle, grinding her children as she sees fit. It is love the way she crushes them. Bits of love fall around her like crumbs. She sends a message to her eldest. Do not come home until your life is straightened out, maybe then. He sees a table laid out for guests, the children and grandchildren, the blue mats and white napkins, the milk and bread, the white bowl like a moon on the table. The mother is in the blue kitchen. Rice is cooking on the stove. The rasp of the pestle fills the air with dust, like dry leaves from the garden, ground into something very, very fine. And then, of course, there have to be pooka poems in there. So this is the first poem that gives you instructions on what to do when you meet the pooka. So instructions on meeting the pooka, number 1. Don't go out on the old roads by yourself. That is where, that is when. Sometimes a man, sometimes a horse. If it has golden eyes, if it speaks, it is never, it is always. If you have spurs, then. If you don't, then. Some of us were made to be ridden, riddled, riven. Never mind your mother, it says, keep your hold. Never mind whether you do or don't, it says, I will make you know. Sometimes a dog, pig, sometimes a bear. If the frost has silvered the blackberries, if they've spit on what you want, sometimes the necessary task, sometimes a story you've heard before. Come with me, it says, and I will bring you home. Sometimes a lie, sometimes the truth. Sometimes a man with the head of a goat. He will give you gold coins, nothing but green leaves. He will teach you new songs. They won't make sense back home. But you know how now. Another one, fairy tale. What he wore that day was darkness, a silver shimmer of teeth, spit threading his words, the sour of dried sweat and dog fennel and yellow leaves, and nothing like what they had said, though we'd heard the story before, how he lingered and where, the door where little boys disappeared, pull the bobbin and the latch will go up. And there he was, watching me, all loose and lizardy and worn out jeans, his lean and lank, the silvery trees, a path fizzling out in animal trails, just instinct and smell, and me no longer a boy. He stood, said nothing, bog moist and rust worn, a bolt and a grin, thick and itchy, and it was there and then, and wind on bare skin, neck bristle and stiffen, red shirt on a limb, a way to make do, and something or someone to sink your teeth into. Fairy tale. What you thought was a wolf was not a wolf. It was your father, mother, brother. You did not remember what big teeth they had, what claws. When your father died, the wolf was at the door ready. Wolf, the wolf wanted you. The wolf wanted you to love what you couldn't have. The wolf made you beg. The wolf made you hard. The wolf said, good boy. The wolf said nothing. What you thought was a wolf was not a wolf. The wolf was a darkness beyond the fence. Once there was a boy who left his door unlocked, asked you to bring a friend and hold him down. You did this. Later, after it was over, he thanked you. Later, a year or so after, you heard he died, a heart attack, and no one found him for days. What you thought was a wolf was not a wolf. The wolf is in the mirror. The wolf is at the door. The door is unlocked. The wolf is a man sleeping, surrounded by flowers. He smells better than you remember. If you kiss the wolf, he will wake up. This is a poem called Not the One. I am not the son you wanted. I am not the brother you wanted. I am not a birthday on the calendar. I am not a photo on your wall. I am not a postcard you will answer. I am not listed in your phone. I am not on the right side. I am not in the pulpit. I am not in the pew. I am not how you imagined it would go. I am not a story you can tell. I am not the latest news. I am not who you thought I was. I am not the way it should be. I am not the moral of the story. I am not riddled with guilt. I am not covered in sores. I am not unaware of the irony. I am not the difference between then and now. I am not in your Venn diagram. I am not a good fit. I am not good. I am not good enough. I am not at the wedding. I am not dearly beloved. I am not the circle of life. I am not an uncle. I am not a place at the table. I am not a vase of flowers. I am not a mylar balloon. I am not just driving through. I am not just stopping by. I am not around much. I am not someone you asked to stay, though you did once so I could help. I am not trying to earn my place. I am not obedient. I am not telling you what you want to hear. For years, I was a folded note in my father's wallet that he didn't know whether to send, and then he sent it. I am not responding to that last text message you sent over a year ago. I am not someone who writes home anymore. I am not someone who goes home anymore. I am not stuck in the past. I am not letting go of the past. I am not very rational about this. I am not this. I'm not that. I'm not one of those or one of them. I'm not one of us. I'm not one of you. I am not handsome. I am not wholesome. I am not holy. I am not coming home. I'm going to read two more poems, one a little longer and then one tiny, tiny poem to end. So Kevin, my tiny poem will be your cue. So two more. This one's just called All You Can Do. The nature of daylight that afternoon was a kind of clarity. It resolved the street, the line of the sidewalk, the shadows outside the cinema, the courthouse. That was the first day I left the therapist office since I started. Was it 2 months, 3? That I felt better after the visit. A woman was speaking loudly on her phone. All you can do is the best you can do. I wanted to take that as a sign. I wanted to remember what she said. The daylight thinned to heat in the windows of the office. What I thought was what I thought, whether true or not. Students and parents of students were packing cars on the hot street, moving out, moving on. The therapist asked, do you think you've been trying to earn a place in your family? When I was walking back, I heard a woman talking on her phone. By the time I got back, I couldn't remember what the woman said. Was it, all you can do is the best you can do? Or The best you can do is all you can do. Surely the difference matters. Thank you again to Malaprops. Thank you all for showing up, and thanks YouTube audience, whoever is watching. And thanks to Brad and Kevin for being part of this as well. This is like, we're brothers. I don't know. One tiny poem and I'm done. Doesn't have a title. Sometimes when it's cold out, I pull on my dad's old denim shirt, warm, worn, the past a thin jacket, what I have left. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kevin McLellan. Thank you, Stephanie and Malaprops, and I am so happy to read with Ed again, and also to read with Brad. I'll be reading from In Other Words, You, and here we go. Dialectical. A wheel in you stopped turning, death a caught word, your eyes a window. Clouds wait for the first spring thunderstorm to clear the palate. Can't decide if you'll stay indoors. Seems premature to imagine the parsley missing ground. Summer's either a portal or a container. Yes, clouds. A turning word caught in the wheel looks you in the eye. Frames. Size of dinner plates. Hibiscus flowers you realize are the reason. Blame them for your sexuality. When the forward leaning into a walker woman sees you approaching, she backs up off the sidewalk, cupping her cigarette. Leans back into a fence. You say, "There's room for both of us, dear." She inhales a deep inhale, says, "Be safe." In the middle of the road, a hands-free teenage boy pedals. Intrinsic. The present will break down easily, will feed a memory landfill. You consider the torso's pulse points as you walk into oncoming traffic. The language of almost. Almost aligns with all other instances. In your mind, these instances create an irregular perforation. There must be more to you than a dotted fault line. Must stop focusing on pairs, torsos, pairs of torsos. You see a shadow, yes. You're hardwired to your phantom, yet you know the railroad will continue to muscle the people and those vile portmanteaus. License plate number. Self-assured in denim cutoffs, white tee, Doc Martens, approaching the Castro. From behind you, a car slows, pulls into a shallow drive. Someone says something. You turn, face 4 teens in red jackets. Out the open window, the driver asks, "Do you like it up the ass?" You ignore him, must continue walking. From behind, hear the swerving. The car gunning at you. Between a tap room and a house, an alley. You up a chain link fence. The 4-door backs up. With all speed, the smell of burnt tires. Out of nowhere, a mannish bartender appears, asks if you're okay, hands you a book of matches. On the inside flap, the handwriting, a sequence of numbers and letters. You keep seeing the embroidery, the backside of red. Earthquakes and volcanoes. Deformation. An empty space is left to be filled. Weak shaking, eruption, patterns in heat transfer, other fluids within thrust, allowing. Dog-eared. The brain sigh, mid-sentence, and process of migrating to the non-paper world. A bouquet of disparate sighs. After a crowd of a few teenagers, the timbre of their laughing voices a foreign ditty. Can't go back to the old fiction of the scarecrow, mocking you. Must change your course. Okay, okay, you are okay. Tornadoes and waterspouts. Rotating surface of, base of, observer, over bodies, vortex, a body congestus, a dark spot, ultimately. Listening to Max Richter's The Departure on repeat. Dear you, I overheard the botanist say to high schoolers at the public gardens, look behind the flower for the swollen base. It took my breath away, and a young woman in the periphery of her peers noticed. She continued to look without it feeling like a stare. As if I was standing in shallow quicksand. I didn't feel shame at first, then walked away and only looked back once. I imagined myself just before out of sight. Two more pieces. Furthermore, under pressure. Dear you, we are all definitions of record and recording. I might even be human. Would you like to accompany me for a tahini brown butter donut after a brisk squat at Mount Auburn's? Or perhaps a cheese and pickle sandwich with some warm broth and a thermos we share, and a potter's field on the other side of the state? Please remember, we have yet to meet. And the last poem. Concerning the storm. That the wind won't put the door back, that the door was a flap, that it won't leave you content, that you're forced to stay indoors, that you're seen as a sad clerk, that you sell used bird cages, poems too, that the flea market is closed, that you want to know there's more to this than body, that perhaps they're right after all, that you decided not to leave during the storm, that the storm began when you began. Thank you.
Right. Oh, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Malaprops. And I can't say how much joy it gives me to be reading with these two, reading from these two books that I love so much. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. I am going to be reading from Parasite Kingdom, my most recent book, and I'm just going to read 4 poems, in part because this book takes a little bit of introduction. So my elevator pitch for this book used to be something like, these poems are set in a kingdom, a war-torn kingdom, whose ruler is a pathetic tyrant whose nemesis is a mythologically gigantic blue wasp who lives in a burrow beneath the palace. Okay. Yeah, and that's it. So the nature of this book and when it came out has led many people to think that it was sort of entirely motivated by the former guy. And yeah, the presence of Trump did definitely spur me to finish this book, but I actually started this book after 9/11. So it took me a good 17 years or so to write. In between, I wrote and published 2 other books. And finished this one in a mad dash. And yeah. So this is the first poem that I wrote that went into the book, and it does kind of establish where we are. It's called Fear. One morning, fear was a little kingdom inhabited by flags and burnt matchsticks and me, scuttling down cracked avenues to the library, where my job was making sense of what was left of the world. Our king sulked in a dim corner, pretending to read old magazines, eluding for now the grip on his shoulder, the usurping voice. Time's up, Your Highness. The librarian will put those away. I bowed. He nodded. His thin lips made me think of the one-armed girl eating dirt in the square. The day was hot. The building stank. Decades of pigeons roosting and dying in the attic had tainted stacks of diaries, histories, novels, atlases, and lexicons of extinct empires. I, their final guardian, our king, the relic and oracle of uncatalogued silences, suffered and stored. Dust shook down, windows rattled as tanks groaned in the street. Open-mouthed, staring like a Boy Scout stripped of his badges, the king let me lead him to a basement table and give him my pocket knife and a carton of unreckoned contents of his regime. As I dragged more cartons from the shadows, he slid open files and envelopes, studied photographs of people with amputated names, transcribed tapes of a woman whispering in a closet, scraped samples from crumbling confessions, scanned columns of numbers and burned them and sniffed their smoke, nodded in a trance, his gaze so rapt I bent my ear close to his lips, hoping for a hint. A shell burst above us. A shadow whimpered behind me. He cowered as boots pounded down the stairs, and I was glad to snatch my knife away, glad to point to his dank little uniform, glad to let them open the ledger of my body, to feel their bayonets inscribe me with their cleansing lies. That's where we are. The book is like a succession of mostly unnamed first-person narrators. A lot of them are just people who are dealing with living in this hellscape. So this next piece is called Firewood Gathering. And as you will see, this is a mother who is dealing at a very visceral level with the war. Firewood gathering. When soldiers fire tracers over the old school, you can see what's left. Maybe you'll get lucky and make it to the thicket by the swamp, if they haven't already stripped it for themselves. Then you'll just have to pull small timber from the rubble. Nothing too big to carry. Don't drag anything. That's how they tracked your father. That gas the palace guards set off in the market, can you taste it in this tea? And it still burns my eyes. I wish I didn't have to send you out tonight. But you're brave, aren't you? A brave girl. And don't you want a hot meal tomorrow? Make a basket with your skirt like this. You'll be surprised how much it can hold. Of course, you'll have to go back to the market tomorrow. Pay the boy for those potatoes and tell him I'm sorry. We don't want him to think we're thieves. I think I went to school with his mother or her sister. Anyway, he has her face. Didn't you think he had pretty eyes? Maybe you'll go to school with him one day. Don't be afraid if I'm not home when you get back. My eyes hurt so bad. Is there water in the bucket? If your aunt could walk with me to the river. I know she's dead. Anyway, I can make it on my own. Anyway, you know how to break up the wood and sort it. It's fun if you use the little song I taught you. Baby's fingers, mother's fingers, father's fingers, kings, this boy's arm and that girl's leg, rifle, barrel, rib. You probably won't come home with anything. You'll have to find something else to sing. Come down to the river. Help me wash my eyes. Some of these citizens, and so that, that's someone who's dealing with things on a very visceral level, as I said, but some of the citizens are just mostly going about their daily lives with some distortions in their daily lives. So this is a poem called Toilet Paper. I go down to the basement to grab a roll of toilet paper from the shelf, but there isn't any. And where the shelf had stood, the wall is wide open. Inside, a uniformed man sits at a desk, lamplit, its top littered with paper, regular paper, the kind you write on. There's a chair. The man gestures toward it, so I obey and sit. The man shuffles some papers, chooses one, and hands it to me, asking, "Did you write this?" Being a writer, I'm curious to know if this is in fact my work, so I take it and try to read it. But the words tell bloody fantasies of regicide, slaughter, revenge. I hand it back. No, I could never write that. Besides, we have a president, not a king. The man points at the page. I lean in to see my name, my signature. The man slides the sheet in a folder, closes it. What were you looking for when you came down here? I squirm, clench my anus shut. It's personal. His cheap deodorant reeks, mingles with the basement's mildew. I'm nauseated. Do you have, what's it called, a warrant? The man sighs, removes his glasses, rubs his eyes. I didn't come to take anything or arrest you. I came to ask if you know your name is on all of these. He gestures across the desk. Behind me, the wall closes. I hear someone walk down the basement stairs, hear the plastic crackle as someone takes a roll from the package and walks back upstairs to have, I'm sure, a normal, hygienic shit, while I'm stuck reading, ashamed of my filth, while the man watches. And the last poem I'm going to read is the only book in the poem that is in the voice of the wasp. Yeah, she's not happy. Testament of the blue wasp. The king's voice wobbles across the palace square from loudspeakers tucked under gun turret eaves, slips through brickwork, pavement, sand to my nest. Some prayer, some rumor of war, some lie taped. It's all taped. I've heard it all. Hunched, I sift his words, sorting them into heaps of darker and lighter grains, some so slick from wind, I imagine wet, almost remember water. Listen, I've lived all my lives here beneath your palace square, tending my nest, my babies' ghosts. Before there was a palace, a king, before there was sand, there was good mud to dig nests in, cold havens beneath the heat. And my prey understood me. Spider and beetle praised the mother's kiss, because I could promise them no death through me, no death through the mother. Be my baby's meat. And then your armies came, and donkeys bearing kings whining for palaces of baked brick, and your drills bored down into my nest, drove me deeper and drilled past me down into stone. For black juice you sucked and burned. Listen, beetle and spider shriveled, withered in greasy smoke. And all the king's carts, trucks, tanks, drills killed the mud, left me smoke to feed my babies, smoke and prayers. No longer, mother, I am every conjugation of death, a memory buried alive, listening to history's hiss, sand slipping down hollow fistulas where I wait, rearranging my nest, my palace. King or ghost of kings, pray. I promise your prayers will guide me to you, and the stiff rhythm of my wings will be breath to you, my legs ancient hairs soft to your coarse skin as smoke to sand. Yield your voice to mine, rest in my palace, freed as mate and meat to me. Let me give you babies of gold and lapis, my army rising. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. All incredible readings, really wonderful. Thank you. And Brad, I know that you wanted to say a little bit more about the Hilary Tham Collection and your work on that, and and of course we have two of the folks who've been selected for the most recent one here. So I'll invite you to do that, and I will also say your name correctly as I invite you to do that. Brad Richard.
Oh, thank you, Steph.
Sorry about that, Brad.
That's all right. Yeah, no, I'm super excited that we're having this all WordWorks poets reading this evening. And this is extremely special for me as the series editor of the Hilary Tham Capital Collection, which is an imprint of the WordWorks. The WordWorks will be 50 years old next year. So a very venerable independent poetry press with multiple imprints. The Hilary Tham Collection is for poets who have volunteered their time to a literary organization or something like that. And by the way, it's still open. Poets can only submit by nomination. We are accepting nominations through May 15th, and poets will need to submit their work by the end of May. So contact me if you're interested. And yeah, I'm thrilled to be reading with Kevin and Ed, who were last year's, whose books were selected last year by Timothy Liu. So one of my favorite things about doing this work is getting to make that phone call to tell people. So you guys, what was it like?
It was surprising. The manuscript had been rejected a lot, or been a finalist or semi-finalist. So it seemed to come out of nowhere, even though I had submitted it there.
Yeah,
And go ahead, Ed.
I was just gonna say, you remember how excited I was.
Yeah.
I was so thrilled. And I will say my book, unlike yours, Kevin, I had my last book had published was in 2016, and I had all these poems that I didn't know how they went together. And then I got a fellowship to go, a residency to go to Hambidge up in the mountains of Northeast Georgia. So I was sitting in a cabin in the mountains of Northeast Georgia, and I had originally planned to go there and work on some essays, but suddenly I had this opportunity. I had 2 weeks. So on the tack board on the wall, I tacked a pooka in Arkansas because I knew I wanted that poem to be the title poem, which is about being home, taking care of my dad and a little dog on the road. And I'm sort of imagining the dog as a kind of pooka, an encounter with the other. And I let poems sort of arrange themselves on the wall like iron shavings around a magnet. And then in the darkness in the woods in a cabin, I wrote like 5 or 6 or 8 weird little pooka poems, and I think I kept 3 or 4 of them for the book. And then you called, and I was like, "Oh my God, it came together!" So I was tickled. I was really tickled.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. It meant a lot to me too that we were adding 2 more books by queer writers to the WordWorks list. And we had Timothy Liu as the judge last year. So that was also really exciting. And I guess I'm going to jump to kind of a broader question here for you guys. I'm thinking back to Ed's remarks at the beginning about how special it is to be doing this in Poetry Month and in the context of the other things that you were talking about. I feel like with everything that is going on, all of the attacks on our rights and our bodies, that the work that we are doing is actually even more important. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Like in such difficult times, what makes poetry important? What makes art important? Just an easy question.
I also invited folks at home to type in questions in the chat, and and we get to as many as we can. And I'm literally talking right now to give y'all some time to think about Brad's very easy question, and also to say that maybe an actually easy question will pop up in chat, in which case I'll read it out to you. So
and this is the only other question I had. So,
so now you should have come up with easy answers to the easy questions. I'll jump back.
You want to go first, Kevin? No. I mean, in some ways, I think of, poetry is our little voice of resistance. It really is. And like, I teach Irish literature, and I love that thing Seamus Heaney said that, after Auden and all the poets who said that, a poem never stopped a tank, right? So a poem never stopped a tank. But then he compares it to Jesus writing on the ground when they're about to stone the sinful woman or whatever. And he says it forced everybody to stop. So the poem might not stop a tank, but it makes everybody pause for a second and think about who they are and where they are and what the fuck they're doing at that moment. And that's what I often hope a poem can do. No matter how small the audience, no matter how small the poem, I think of language that is carefully constructed as very different from the language of journalism or propaganda. The language of journalism propaganda is about getting content to us, getting propaganda to us, getting messages to us. And poetry is about making us pause and thinking about what words do and what they can allow us to think differently. I don't know if that's an adequate answer, but that's what I would say.
It's a great answer.
I guess the thing is that, coming of age, in the early 1980s during the AIDS pandemic, there's something about that I feel radicalized by. And so I feel like I've not stopped being political. I feel like I have no choice but to be political. And I think that also being in an environment such as Cambridge, for which I'm realizing is that I'm very radical, but I don't realize it when I'm in my own environment. So there's something about that too, it's sort of a, visiting Ed in South Carolina was this huge realization that, wow, things are different here. And I'm not saying things are great here either. But in regard to the freedom that I have to be radical is it's a luxury. And I guess I'm just realizing that my work is radical, not only necessarily in subject but in form. I knew it was radical in form, but I didn't necessarily think it was radical in content. And I'm beginning to see that it is a little bit. So a very sort of different kind of answer to your question.
No, a great answer. Yeah.
Hey, can we ask you a question?
Sure.
What was it like to get our two books from Timothy or from Tim and say, here they are?
That was really, really exciting. It was so fun, it's all blind. So, then we turn on the names in the submission manager and I get to see, oh my God, this is who it is. So there's that super excitement there. But it was really, like I said, it was just so wonderful to have these two books by queer writers added to our list. Very exciting for me. Yeah, and for the press. It was just great. So, and Tim was thrilled. Yeah.
So I'm going to break in with a question from the audience. Nancy White says, you each have such strong voices. What would you tell still developing poets about that mysterious quest, quote unquote, finding your voice? Where do we look? How do we do it? Another easy question.
I guess I'll start. I guess what I always tell younger writers is to discover and honor your process, because it's not going to be the same as anyone else in regard to creating not only poems, but anything. And that to be patient. Patience is such a huge part of it. And also rejection is a huge part of it. But maintaining that faith is really important, that what you're doing, and if you are patient and you are persistent, things will begin to happen for you. I finished an MFA in 1999, and the first poem that I had published was in 2004. So 5 years I waited for that first journal publication. I had been published before the MFA, so that was even harder, that I had gone through all of this training and then still waited this amount of time. Although submissions back then were snail mail, there was no submittable. But anyway, that's my experience.
Thank you, Kevin. Brad or Ed?
I feel like when you're beginning, you are taking in so much and you're hearing so many voices, because you're getting excited about stuff that you're reading. You are meeting other poets, who are your peers and your teachers. So I think it takes a while sometimes to actually hear your own voice separate from those voices. And then from there, I would just say, trust that, and let it, let it be your guide for the kind of work you want to write, and how it's going to be written. Because as Kevin was saying, your process isn't going to be like anybody else's, because your work isn't going to be like anybody else's. I spent a lot of time on voice with my students at LSU this semester, and it was great having them actually analyze their own poetic voices. And then I had them do an exercise where I had them try to incorporate like one or two elements from someone else's voice into their work, which I think also helped them think about their voice. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love both of those answers. And I like you, Brad, I think about the ways in which when you first start writing, you let all these other voices in. And I love, Kevin, what you said about patience, which I think it's not just about, like, as you suggest, the submission process, it's patience with yourself and where the voice can go. I mean, I'm going to say I had this weird moment with my second book. And my friend Ray McManus, who's a poet in South Carolina, who's published by Hub City Press and some other places, he told me I had two voices. So one was this sort of meditative voice, and the other was this voice he called Ned. So there was Ed, and then there was Ned, and Ned cared more about sound than sense. So he liked sonically dense things that might not really make good sense. And I think what I realized when he told me that is I really like Ned a lot. And so what I had to let happen was figure out how Ned and Ed work together, like how those meditative, sometimes very prosy poems could work alongside poems that felt sort of skittery and dense and were good in your mouth because of all the sounds, but sometimes you weren't quite sure where they were going. So I don't know. I don't know how well I'm answering your question, but letting yourself be open to possibilities of voice and letting yourself try possibilities of things that might not really sound like you, but then you realize, oh, that really is me.
Excellent. Thank all of you for those answers. The next question we have a visual aid for, because William's asking each of you, what's your favorite malapropism? And thanks, William, for that question.
Can I start this? My favorites all come from my husband, who makes up shit all the time. It's not trickle down theory, it's trickle down theory. I mean, he's always doing that, and he just makes me laugh because he makes up words, and I love him for that.
My mother had a neighbor who was a genius with malapropisms. Little did she know. And one of my favorites was, she talked about going to some performance of something, and oh, she was just memorized by that performance.
My previous book is titled Ornithology. So I have to go with that. Also published by the WordWorks.
Yeah, I think I stumbled over that in the introduction a little bit, which was probably part of the part of your goal.
It's fun being a trickster.
Yeah, that's great. So yes, and we're Malaprop's bookstore. I'll just, we're all about the malapropisms, obviously. And for anyone who doesn't know, if you'll indulge me for a moment, the founder of our store, Emika, is immigrated from Hungary. And she created this store, and she named it after the character Miss Malaprop in a play that was written it's hundreds of years old actually at this point. And we suspect, and I think she's admitted to the fact, that part of it was, of course, as an immigrant with English being your second language, this is something that would, that she was sort of prone to. And it's become a name that we get asked about. People come into the store all the time and ask us what it means. It wasn't until believe it or not, just a couple of years ago that we made shirts with the definition on it. We had other shirts with the logo and stuff, and so anyway, we have a lot of fun with, I wish I could think of a really good one right now. I can't. Y'all have the good ones anyway. So thank you for that question, William. And we're at the top of the hour, and I want to be conscientious of everyone's time, and I want to give Ed and Brad and Kevin time for some final thoughts before we say good night to everyone. And I just want to thank you all so much again for your readings this evening, and thanks all the folks who have been with us. And why don't we go out in the same order? We'll start with Ed for final thoughts.
I would just say thank you. This was a delight, Kevin and Brad. This was such a delight, and thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to Malaprops. And again, this was Read Across South Carolina Day. So celebrating the joys of reading, but also resisting the banning of books. Absolutely. And remember Banned Books Week every year in the fall. Is another, celebrate banned books all the time, but the American Library Association has more information about banned books, what's being banned and challenged, and Banned Books Week. I'll just throw in that plug as well. And then Kevin.
Yeah, I want to thank you all. I'm so happy to read with Ed and Brad again. And please support Malaprop by buying our books. That would be really thoughtful for the bookstore and us. We are not making bucks, but we do need to sell some books so that we can support small independent presses. That's my message.
And I will add a third thank you to Stephanie and Malaprops and Kevin and Ed. This has been a real delight. Yes, support your local independent bookstores. They really need it. I show them some love. Buy some poetry books. And if you are listening out there and you are connected to a literary organization that has some poet volunteers, talk to me.
That's great, Brad. Yes, please do that. I posted a link in the chat for folks with that information. Thank you all so much again. It was really lovely to hear you all read. And thanks for being here, for celebrating National Poetry Month with us, and just a delight, which I think is a word we've all used now because it's accurate. So thank you all so much again, and to everyone at home, thank you. And we hope to see you again in some form or fashion. And until then, stay safe and well. And good night, everybody.